Hello, this is Melissa, and today is the 21st of April, 2024. And it's another foot-dragging day. It's Saturday night. It has been raining here all day long, and also we've had plenty of thunder and lightning, a loud day. And I kept thinking, well, it's bound to stop sometime because it always comes through on the recording, but it hasn't stopped, so here I go. Now, the Redux that I picked for today, I actually played this as a Redux about a year and a half ago, and you'd think with all of the thousands of talks that Alan has to choose from, I wouldn't have to redo a Redux, but I am because thematically there's just so much going on with this one that has been on my mind for the last week or so. And what I may even do is repurpose some of the video that I used because here it is already, Saturday night. One thing that I will do different from the first time that I played it is I'm actually going to cut out some of the topical news stories that Alan used at that time, September 30, 2018. Control over minions from ancient times meant studying prey, then disabling minds. And some of the topical stories that I will cut include Theresa May's husband, Philip May, and his ties to the weapons industry. But I am going to substitute that for a new story from just a couple of days ago where Scotland's former First Minister, that's the head of Scotland's government, Nicola Sturgeon, her husband, Peter Murrell, was arrested and charged in connection with the embezzlement of funds from the Scottish National Party, which she once led and where he once held a senior position. Now, this is the second time that he's been arrested for this, but it looks like this time charges will stick. She also was arrested maybe a couple of years ago, but was not charged. It said the announcement, which follows a lengthy inquiry by the Scottish police, is another blow to the party, which controls the Scottish government and campaigns for independence. The party was thrown into turmoil after Ms. Sturgeon's surprise resignation last year. After her departure as First Minister, Ms. Sturgeon was also arrested as part of the investigation into her party's finances, but she was released and has not been charged. Police Scotland said in a statement that it had charged a 59-year-old man in connection with the embezzlement of funds from the Scottish National Party. He was arrested at 9:13 a.m. and charged at 6:35 p.m. After questioning by detectives, the police said, adding the man is no longer in police custody. He's been charged, then let go, but this is a serious thing. Now, this is a total aside here, but it just kind of made me laugh and think of a story that Alan told. The press met Ms. Sturgeon outside her home as she was about to get into her car. And she said that this was a very difficult time, an incredibly difficult time. And she had nothing else to say about it, and could they please leave her alone because she was just learning to drive. Driving a car was still very new to her, and she needed to concentrate. Now, Nicola Sturgeon's background is pretty solidly middle class. I think it said her mother was a dental nurse and her father was an electrician. But here she is, a former First Minister of Scotland at the age of 53, just learning to drive a car. And so I'm sure her story is a little different than the story that Alan told. But she does appear to have been picked up early, groomed for politics, and that has been pretty much her entire adult life. And Alan told about meeting a woman who was not a politician, but a lifelong bureaucrat and the daughter of lifelong bureaucrats, who was raised with a certain amount of privilege and was chauffeur driven everywhere to school and so forth. And she had never learned to drive a car. And everything was laid out for her in the morning by the butler. She was trained through her formative years to become a career bureaucrat. And she was having a conversation with Alan on the phone one time, and she was basically telling him about her pension, her life, and so forth, and things that she could say about what she knew, but it would be difficult to put her privileges and her life her lifestyle on the line in order to do that. And she said to Alan, I don't know how you people, that's probably how she said it, I don't know how you people live. She said the without quality medical care and dental and eyes and, in other words, the prospect of being faced with living a normal life where things weren't just laid on for you and arranged for you and all of your needs taken care of terrified her. So I don't think that's quite Nicola's story, but she is just learning to drive a car, and her husband was just arrested and charged with embezzlement. There are a few other things of the topical nature from the 2018 talk that I'm going to cut. A bit about Hillary Clinton, private police in Britain. I may or may not leave Canada and the marijuana industry in there, because that's also now just completely normalized. Just to make room for a couple of other things here, one of which is in the U.S., the House, which is Congress, has just passed a bill, and that will be giving how many billions? I think it's about $95 billion. And that $95 billion provides $61 billion in aid to Ukraine, $26 billion in aid for Israel, and then some additional, the rest of the billions. At this point, it's just a tiny amount of money, right? To the Indo-Pacific region. I'm not even going to bother to comment on that money and where it's going and why, but it is being tied into a measure that would lead or could lead to a TikTok ban. That just got me thinking about a couple of things. First of all, we are so entwined with China worldwide. You hear about trade imbalances and Trump shaking his fist and we're going to get China out of here. And, like China's the big bad communist enemy that we have sent virtually all of our manufacturing to for the last close on 30 years now. So these things are kind of a joke to me. I had a little bit of a back and forth on the email this week with a longtime listener to Alan Watt, and he was just recapping his disgust for what you call the Patriot side of things and how everything has been co-opted by the Republicans. He took it back to Ron Paul in 2012, but we really saw this go into effect for sure around Donald Trump at 2016, Make America Great Again, MAGA. Alan Watt said, quite right, when he came out, he said this a few times with no bragging, it's just a statement of fact, that he was able to turn the Patriot world, the Patriot business, away from the navel gazing and bring them the information to show them that what we are living through is a global agenda. That the same bills are passed in different countries around the world, and we are more or less moving in unison to achieve what are supranational goals. What I found interesting about what started in 2016 was the move away from the kind of information that Alan had shared with people, that again, it was politics, it was left, right, left, right, left, right. By my observation, this really ramped up in 2020 because the events of 2020 to 2024 brought to people, it made it obvious to people that what was happening, that laws that were being implemented, that freedoms that were being curtailed, was again a very coordinated approach that was being implemented around the globe. And in order to, cynically I could say, have any credibility, those in the alternate media would have to give lip service like a parrot to things like the Fourth Industrial Revolution or the Great Reset or the World Economic Forum. They might even write a book about it or expose it or, go on different shows to talk about that bad man, Klaus Schwab, and shake their fist at the idea that he would dare want to bring them into something called the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And then out of the other side of their mouth, all we needed to do was support Trump and make America great again. So that's what's been happening in a very ramped up way over the last 4 years. And it's becoming louder and louder as we move in the U.S., this next election, or next bit of theater, as I like to look at it. When you look at different merchandising on the Patriot side of things, wherever you look, it doesn't matter what site you look at. You might be seeing some zinc supplement being sold for $35 that you could find pretty much the same ingredients at your local pharmacy for $7 or $8. Or you might see T-shirts for sale that are, Trump 2024 or Drain the Swamp or whatever, but you can't find out where those T-shirts were manufactured. They don't tell you. Are they made in the U.S.? And this is one thing I learned in Canada, and it's the same, I've noticed the same thing here, is that often in Canada has a unique way of labeling things so that they won't tell you where the honey comes from. But the label, they proudly advertise on the jar of honey as having been made in Canada. And so you'll find the same thing across the board with products in Canada where they proudly advertise the fact that the packaging or some component or it was assembled in Canada, so forth. And that's what we have in the U.S. So when I was just scrolling online and looking at different Patriot-type T-shirts that were being sold around, problem, reaction, solution, or drain the swamp or whatever, I could not find anybody bragging, oh, this is made in the USA or anything. They would tell you, sometimes they wouldn't even tell you the fabric makeup of the T-shirt. But eventually I found some places that were talking about it being, 90% cotton, 10% polyester. One thing that I kept finding across the board with these Patriot T-shirts was this. The printer of this product sources blanks, that would mean large quantities of fabric. So sources blanks from manufacturers committed to improving cotton farming practices with the Better Cotton Initiative. Well, what's the Better Cotton Initiative? It's a nonprofit, multi-stakeholder governance group out of Switzerland that promotes better standards in cotton farming and practices across 22 countries. As of 2023, Better Cotton accounts for 22% of global cotton production. Partners include H&M, Gap, IKEA, Levi Strauss, and include funding partners from USAID. USAID is an organization that you ought to look into. I may just put up a link for you to help you out on your search, but it has long been tied to CIA operations. But let's see, what countries do they work with in the Better Cotton Initiative? They work with countries in Africa, Brazil, India, Pakistan, and the initiative expanded in 2013 to include China, Tajikistan, Turkey, and Mozambique. The Better Cotton Initiative loves to tell you how green and how sustainable and how ethical they are. Really, they're completely in line with Agenda 2030 and the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. So that's what your patriots are pushing. And I just find things like that to be ironic. In this exchange, this back and forth exchange that I had with the listener via email, I just mentioned to him, and I'll read you the line because he fed it right back to me, something that I wrote to him. I said, one technique that Allen used was the news. Just reading and talking about one horrific, stupid, ridiculous, evil thing after another. Try to wake people from their slumber. Try to stir up a bit of righteous indignation about what's happening. Let's face it, if people can't even be bothered to defend a baby in the womb or a 12-year-old being fed hormone blockers like candy, are they going to bother with anything at all? Some people would sometimes say to Allen, you should get back into the occult and, that's interesting, and the origins and history and all of that. And again, Allen would say, we're past that point. We're at a different place, and people really do need to be able to wake themselves up from an entertainment slumber and start to care about what's going on in the world. A lot of you are going to remember that Allen covered in that covering the bad news stuff. He covered the Bill Clinton and the tainted blood scandal, the prison blood scandal. And someone just sent me this week something that ties into that. This is from a couple of days ago, so about the 18th of April, 2024. I'm going to read this with no comment at all. Let you think for yourselves when I'm done reading it, whatever you need to think. Infected blood scandal. Children were used as guinea pigs in clinical trials. The true scale of the number of medical trials using infected blood products on children in the 1970s and 80s has been revealed by documents seen by BBC News. They reveal a secret world of unsafe clinical testing involving children in the UK as doctors placed research goals ahead of patients' needs. They continued for more than 15 years, involved hundreds of people, and infected most with hepatitis C and HIV. One surviving patient told the BBC he was treated like a guinea pig. The trials involved children with blood clotting disorders when families had often not consented to them taking part. The majority of the children who enrolled are now dead. Documents also show that doctors in hemophilia centers around the country used blood products, even though they were widely known as likely to be contaminated. A shortage of blood products in the UK in the 1970s and 80s meant they were imported from the US. High-risk donors such as prisoners and drug addicts provided the plasma for the treatments that were infected with potentially fatal viruses including hepatitis C, which attacks the liver, resulting in cirrhosis and cancer, and HIV. One blood product, known as Factor VIII, was seen to be highly effective for stopping bleeding, but also widely known to be contaminated with viruses. A public inquiry is underway into the scandal. The final report is due in May. Luke O'Shea Phillips, 42, has mild hemophilia, a blood-clotting disorder that means he bruises and bleeds more easily than most. He caught the potentially lethal viral infection hepatitis C while being treated at the Middlesex Hospital in central London, which was administered because of a small cut to his mouth, aged 3, in 1985. Documents seen by the BBC suggest he was deliberately given the blood product, which his doctor knew might have been infected, so he could be enrolled in a clinical trial. The doctor wanted to find out how likely patients were to catch diseases from a new version of heat-treated Factor VIII. Though he had never been treated for his condition before, Luke was given heat-treated Factor VIII to stop his mouth bleeding. A letter from Luke's doctor, Samuel Machen, to another expert in hemophilia was submitted in evidence to the public inquiry into the infected blood scandal. Writing to Peter Kernoff at London's Royal Free Hospital, Dr. Machen detailed the treatment of Luke and another boy, asking, "I hope they will be suitable for your heat-treated trial." Months earlier, Dr. Kernoff had called on fellow doctors in the field to identify patients suitable for clinical trials. Specifically, he said they had to be previously untreated patients, known as PUPs in the medical community. They were also nicknamed virgin hemophiliacs, a term written on Luke's medical record by Dr. Machen. "I was a guinea pig in clinical trials that could have killed me," Luke told the BBC. "There is no other way to explain it. My treatment was changed so I could be enrolled in clinical trials. This change in medication gave me a fatal disease, hepatitis C, yet my mother was never even told. To the scientific world, it was an incredible benefit being a virgin hemophiliac," he added. "To be a clean petri dish to understand science through. I was without question a part of that." In the following years, as the medical trial reached its conclusions, Luke had many blood tests. Doctors said they were monitoring him, and at the time his mother, Shelley O'Shea, was grateful. In their findings published in 1987, Dr. Kernoff and Dr. Machen concluded heat treatment had little or no effect in reducing the risk of hepatitis C. Both Dr. Kernoff and Dr. Machen are now dead. Before he died, Dr. Machen gave evidence to the public inquiry when he confirmed that Luke had been recruited to Dr. Kernoff's study. He denied this had been done without Luke's mother's knowledge. This would have been discussed with his mother, although I acknowledge that standards of consent in the 1980s was quite different to what it is now, Dr. Machen said. However, Mrs. O'Shea told the inquiry she was absolutely not told about the trial. "With an innocent child of 3.5, I would not have considered such an action. I would never, ever have allowed my child to be a part of a trial. Never," she added. Documents reveal doctors knew Luke had contracted hepatitis C as early as 1993, but he was not told until 1997. One medical record states a positive test result and says, "Have not discussed with patient or family." Luke is now clear of the infection after successful treatment. However, evidence of the clinical trials have raised wider concerns. A patient should always be given the best possible treatment, and they should always have been given informed consent. If those two factors haven't been achieved, then a trial would be seen as very problematic, said Professor Emma Cave, Healthcare Law, Durham University. Professor Edward Tuddenham, who was a hemophilia doctor at the Royal Free Hospital in the 1980s, confirmed these fears. When asked if he thought ethical standards had been met during clinical trials in the 1980s, he simply answered no. The BBC's investigation has revealed that Dr. Machen and Dr. Kernoff were among a community of doctors with similar research ambitions. A specialist school near Alton in Hampshire was attended by a large cohort of hemophiliac boys. The School for Disabled Children had an NHS hemophilia unit on site, so boys who had bleeds could be treated quickly and then returned to lessons. Their doctor, Dr. Anthony Arenstam, who has also since died, used his unique cohort of boys for extensive clinical trials. One series of experiments considered whether using 3 to 4 times more factor VIII than normally required by a child would help to reduce the number of bleeds he had. This was preventative treatment known as prophylaxis and involved repeated injections with infected factor VIII products and follow-up blood tests. The high concentrations of infected blood products were administered to the boys without their or their parents' consent. Of the 122 pupils attending Treloar's College between 1974 and 1987, 75 have so far died of HIV and hepatitis C infections. Despite knowing the product was riddled with hepatitis, they started a trial that required us to have way more of it than we needed, says Gary Webster, who was unknowingly enrolled. Abe Goodyear, a pupil at Treloar's from 1980 to 1989, added, "We were treated like lab rats. There was a plethora of studies that we were all enrolled on for the decade we were at the school." Controversially, another trial involved placebo treatments. This meant that some boys who thought that they had been given factor VIII to prevent bleeds had in fact been given a saline solution. "When you think you've been given a treatment, this changes your behavior," Gary said. "You run more, you play more rough in football. For a hemophiliac, you feel a bit invincible for a short window after a jab. But with a placebo, you are just risking your life by changing your behavior." He told the BBC he was punished at school if he missed injections. It would have meant their trials would have been flawed, and so we, us kids, were made to toe the line. Documents just released show the government in 1973 knew about the trials at Treloar's and covered some costs. Dr. Kurnoff's pursuit of clinical advancement through research was rigorous, as was his hunt for suitable subjects for trials, pups and virgin hemophiliacs, which led to those involved getting young and younger. A 4-month-old baby was involved in a trial. Among his studies was one that compared the infectiousness of another blood plasma product that was called cryoprecipitate, or cryo, to factor VIII concentrates. Cryo was used for treating mild blood clotting conditions. It contained the factor VIII protein, but at lower concentrations and from fewer donors, and was therefore thought to be less risky. Dr. Kurnoff's search for suitable subjects led him to Mark Stewart, his brother, and his father, who all had very mild cases of von Willebrand's disease, another type of blood clotting disorder. Their usual treatment was cryo. As part of his test, Dr. Kurnoff gave them all factor VIII concentrates instead. Until we were given concentrates, it would be once a month you'd have a little nosebleed and you'd go up and you'd have cryo, and that was that. All 3 contracted hepatitis C. Mark's brother and father have both died of liver cancer after the infection attacked the organ. Neither were told they had contracted the disease until it was too late for treatment. "Angry is an understatement," Mark said. "Your dad is in the front carriage, your brother is in the second carriage, and you are in the third carriage. So you know what is coming. It won't veer off that track. This is how Hep C works. It will get you." A statement from Treloar's said, "We await the publication of the infected blood inquiry, which we hope will provide our former pupils with the answers they have been waiting for. The inquiry into the wider infected blood scandal will conclude on 20 May. And the last thing that I want to cover really quickly before I leave you with Alan is free speech. I mentioned that someone had sent me a little comment on a video, and they said, if you think that Scotland's bill is bad. Take a look at Ireland. And I shared a little article on that, but I had not yet looked into the bill. The Newsweek article said Ireland needs to say no. Most strikingly, for a hate speech bill, the legislation offers no definition of what hate entails, meaning even peaceful expression could fall prey to criminal prosecution. And the Irish Minister for Justice rejected the inclusion of a definition, saying it would hamper the ability of the prosecution to secure convictions. So I decided to take the time to look at the bill, and I'm going to post that so that you can see it for yourselves. Now, these bills tend to take a long time. I think this is in its third presentation, and I don't know how it works in Ireland, but this third presentation was sometime last year, but it's moving forward, and I think the third presentation means that it's gone through 2 stages successfully, and now it's in the third stage. It's about 40 pages long, and I will not be reading you the whole bill, and it's written in bureaucratese, which is kind of painful anyway. But basically, hate speech is defined in what is the bill, what is Part 1, Section 3, meaning of protected characteristics. So that means if your speech is against somebody that has a protected characteristic in relation to a person or a group of persons, meaning any of the following, namely, and here they are. So this is protected characteristic: race, color, nationality, religion, national or ethnic origin, descent, who do you descend from, gender, sex characteristics, sexual orientation, or disability. I'm not going to say too much about the protected characteristics, except just now it leapt out at me. Sex characteristics, I am not quite sure how they could be offended or claim hate, because the sex characteristic is that which characterizes you, like breasts or genitalia. So I guess it's saying if a person possesses those sex characteristics, but then again, we all possess sex characteristics. So they go on to elaborate just a little bit. I'll read you this. It says, this is for all of the protected characteristics. References to religion include references to the absence of a religious conviction or belief. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. References to descent include references to persons or groups of persons who descend from persons who could be identified by certain characteristics such as race or color, but not necessarily all of those characteristics still exist. References to national or ethnic origin include references to membership of the traveler community. That's what is sometimes referred to as gypsies. Gender means the gender of a person or the gender which a person expresses as the person's preferred gender or with which the person identifies, and includes transgender and a gender other than those of male and female. Sexual orientation has the same meaning as it has in Section 2.1 of the Equal Status Act of 2000, which heaven knows where we'll find that. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say heaven, but references to sex characteristics shall be construed as references to the physical and biological features of a person relating to sex, and disability has the same meaning that it has in Section 2.1 of the Equal Status Act of 2000. One other little section of this that I want to share is quite chilling, and this has to do with the search warrants. Oh, just so that you understand how crazy bureaucraties is, here's a little bit on the protection of freedom of expression, to which all I could say when I finished reading it was, huh? This is item 11. For the purposes of this part, any material or behavior is not taken to incite violence or hatred against a person or a group of persons on account of their protected characteristics or any of those characteristics solely on the basis that that material or behavior includes or involves discussion or criticism of matters relating to a protected characteristic. And again, I'll say, huh? Now this is a bit about search warrants. This is kind of scary. Item number 15. 1. If a judge of the district court is satisfied by information on oath of a member that there are reasonable grounds for suspecting that evidence of or relating to the commission of an offense under Section 7, 8, or 10 is to be found in any place, the judge may issue a warrant for the search of that place and any persons found at that place. 2. A search warrant under this section shall be expressed and shall operate to authorize a named member accompanied by such other members or persons or both as the member thinks necessary. So now this was the point where I stopped and I'm like, oh, okay, so a member is different than a person. So what's a member? Well, they don't define what a member is, so I just had to use my own reasoning here and figure out that a member is a member of, let's say, the police. And a person is just you and me. We're just in the general public. So rereading that, it says, if the district court is satisfied on oath that a member of the police says that there's reasonable grounds for suspecting that evidence is there. Okay. So a search warrant under this section shall be expressed and shall operate to authorize a named member of the police. I'm supplying that for you there. Accompanied, and that I'm sure would come to mean any governing body, because they've already in this document talked about different governing bodies and bodies, so bodies with their members. So a search warrant under this section shall be expressed and shall operate to authorize a named member accompanied by such other members or persons or both as the member thinks necessary. What you find here, and I'll let you read through this yourselves, is that basically a member or members of the police with persons, and so that would mean anybody in the general public and maybe even the person who made the claim in the first place, if it's deemed necessary by the member, can enter at any time within 1 week of the date of issue of the warrant on production the place named in the warrant. Anytime. They can search it and any persons found in that place. So you could just be over there having a cup of coffee, having a chat with a neighbor, wrong place, wrong time, right? To examine, seize, and retain anything found at that place or anything found in possession of a person present at that place at the time of the search, that member reasonably believes to be evidence of or relating to the commission of an offense under Section 7, 8, or 10, as the case may be. It goes on and on and on and on. It's not confined to things that they think might contain this. Examine, seize, retain anything found at that place. Operate any computer at the place that is being searched or cause any such computer to be operated by a person accompanying the member for that person. Require any person at that place who appears to the member to have lawful access to the information, to give the member any password necessary to operate it, any encryption key or code necessary to unencrypt the information accessible by the computer, and otherwise to enable the member to examine the information accessible by the computer in a form in which the information is visible and legal, or to produce the information in a form in which it can be removed and in which it is or can be made visible and legible. And it still goes on. It's scary stuff here. It made me think about where we are, and again, back to patriots and the right being co-opted by the Republicans in this country, and I think you'll find that to be the case wherever you are. That where you thought maybe a decade ago you had some dissent and you had voices that were speaking out for truth to the man, that what you now have, it has been co-opted by the political system. And so you have mouthpieces. Say, for instance, J.K. Rowling is the authorized recipient of hate, who can do a free speech dance with members. Mostly what we see doing the free speech dance are the authorized voices, either for or against something. The people that have been put up there to stir the pot or take the heat. And Elon Musk presented as the champion of free speech. And you have a very well-coordinated, very slick group of people in every country who are shaking their fists at the top and saying, you can't do that. You can't do that to us. And we've been lulled into, wearing our ethically sourced cotton t-shirts that say, drain the swamp. We're lulled into thinking that these people are speaking for us, and they're not. I think I'm going to leave it at that. There was a little bit of the things that I looked into in the free speech and comedy world, but I think I may save that for another day. I return again to Alan always cautioning us to be our own champion. And here, in this talk, he adds a little element that he doesn't talk about often, but one that I think is important for myself and one I notice in other people, but still myself, I see this. Be still in your mind in order to learn. And we allow ourselves to be fed this, the circus act of the bread and circuses, the show, and we kind of crave it. The political infighting and the name calling, and can you believe so-and-so said such and such, and the more outrageous it is, never stopping to think that the people who are saying these things that are outrageous, that actually constitute hate crime with its lack of definition, are speaking for us. We don't consider that they're just part of the circus of entertainment. So here is Alan. Have a great week, and I'll be back in some other form saying something else at some point, because I'm going to be my own champion. Take care.
Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt, and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 30th of September 2018. I should kick off by just mentioning, before I always forget of course, that you can buy the books and discs at cuttingthroughthematrix.com. And remember too, you can donate and help me tick along here and pay for all different sites I have, because I'm not selling anything else. I'm not selling, whatever, t-shirts and products to make you live forever or things like that. I'm just giving you basically information which hopefully, delivered in a proper way, will help you understand the system we're born into. A really good system. By good I mean for someone who wants to study it. It's a work of something. You could say art, I suppose, and almost in a demonic way, because it's very clever. And it's clever because the ancients, and we are very old, humanity is very old. And look at the ancient empires, of course, from China and Middle East and different places, all the places that actually had written histories. And even Plato's great uncle, Solon, who went off, as they all did, all the aristocracy went off to study in Egypt at the time, of ancient Greece, that is. And he was told, you Greeks don't even know how old you are. That was back then. And how many empires had risen and managed the world and fallen over maybe even thousands of years. Now, since they had empires in ancient times, going way back, even before Christianity, for instance, for maybe thousands of years. We just don't know. Although they're always finding evidence of new old civilizations, put it that way. All over the place, actually, in the ancient world. But an empire tells you that you have something very important, and that is an understanding of human nature and how to control human nature in order to profit from the bulk of the population. That's what it's all about. Always has been, always is today. In fact, same thing. It is. Therefore, they had the sciences, like Machiavelli of the Middle Ages, they had the sciences in ancient times as well, by the studying of human nature. We've got to stop thinking that because TV wasn't invented thousands of years ago, that they couldn't learn about all the things that you're studying today. Knowledge was always accumulated, because knowledge is power. And for ruling people, you've got to always have it written down, or at least passed on to students, as to how to control and manage the general population, how to profit from. It's always to do with profiting from the bulk of the populace. I've always mentioned that Albert Pike made a big thing about this too, in a very small little statement. It's a big thing, big meaning behind a little statement, and that we make no apologies for nature, because it's an elitist thing even for the low Masons who don't understand that. It's very elitist. And it picks out potential people for positions in different controlling functions over society. The bulk of the populace never get to that position, of course. They're the outer portico, as Pike said. But they do understand human nature. Plato did the same thing, and Plato bewailed the fact, and so did his contemporaries, that with writing, and more people writing, then the art of memory and memorizing would be lost. Because in those days, you had to really, really memorize things, like you do with we used to do that too with our times table, for instance, in school. But now it's all calculators and computers and so on. But in ancient times, they started writing stuff down too, and for the controlling elite, you see, it used to be kept very secretive. And the best way to have it secretive is to be taught directly to the people without writing. No notes, no nothing. Just your memory is the best way for secrecy. It's also, there's no evidence, you see. And even conspirators today understand that you shouldn't really have any evidence of your conspiracy possible in any recorded method at all. And so they go to great lengths to try and be very secretive and to be anonymous. But anyway, getting back to what I'm saying, empires, the understanding of human nature, the controlling of human nature, the using of human nature for your own purposes, including wars. People at the top are always ambitious, they always want more, and they intermarry with other ambitious little either city-states in ancient times or countries across even waters in those days too. They always intermarried their elites off, so they became one big family if possible. And those big families would go through the motions of war sometimes too, which culled down the population to an extent. It really did achieve different techniques of keeping the masses, abused. If you abuse the masses, they cling to the abuser, all the more so, to keep them safe. But the people have always been used to accumulate wealth on behalf of those who basically own them. So I go through this in my writings and in a lot of my discs, which you can buy at cuttingthroughthematrix.com website, go into the purchasing and so on. And I go through the techniques that have been used in ancient times and all through time to the present day, because it's so important to understand human nature, maybe more so than ever before. And it's not an easy thing to teach someone. It is actually easy to teach them, I should say, but it isn't so easy in this day and age especially to have them still enough, still in the mind, to understand what's being said. Their minds are racing half the time, because they're now living in an age of massive overstimulation. A technique admitted to by the mass of data that's thrown at them through entertainment. You get up in the morning, the radio's blasting away there, and they might go to work with radio blasting away, and these babble-mouth, nonsensical disc jockeys still pushing their nonsense, this babble, like immature babble. And then they have messages thrown at them all day long through computers and you name it. And then back again at home, and then they're trying to relax through escaping into fantasy and fiction. And they're getting overloaded then too. But the mind itself finds it harder to think for itself. It's part of the technique of control. There's an old saying, be still, be still. It's like the Old Testament, it's be still and know that I am God. Same kind of idea. In the New Testament as well. A technique, you got to be still once in a while. You got to do it. And when you're still, your mind will crowd naturally with all your little worries off the day. That's why you love to distract yourself so you don't think too much. And that's why your masters and those who own you want you to constantly be bombarded and be distracted too. Then you won't think too much. You're quite safe if you don't think too much. You let everyone else do your thinking for you by the data that's thrown at you through entertainment and different other guises. They understand in ancient times they didn't have all this extraneous entertainment. They didn't have televisions and radio. But they put on lots of plays for the people. Well, it wasn't the Greeks that invented the old plays and so on. It was much older than that. Because entertainment is essential, as Plato said too, if you are going to raise people in a city-state. City-states are the beehives. They become the engines of this particular artificial system. Cities don't produce much except everything to do with superfluous stuff, or actually almost gossamer stuff. It's abstract. It's money in itself. It's numbers and so on. That's what they produce. And everyone in the city must pay big high rents for tiny little places, which consumes a lot of their income for a lot of people, for working class people. And they get trapped in it. They get consumed with all the data and the things that are happening around them too. The speed, the people, blah, blah. It's very unnatural. Some folk will say they love it, but personally I don't like it at all. Too many people in the cities. It's just too fake, too unnatural. It's synthetic. And it's so far removed from how people really were meant to live. And really, you need space. And if possible, you should all be living and scattered around the country. If your masters would allow it, but which of course they never would do. But at least there you have some space and quietness if you want it. And peace and quiet and freedom to an extent at the moment. And that was why in ancient times, even Rome had, at least they wrote about it, they had their different writers who wrote about different things there, but they mentioned about the aristocracy of Rome and the Senate and the senators causing overthrows and temporary coups of the government because these senators were greedy aristocratic families and they wanted more and more land from the rural people. The people who produced actually fed the city people, you see. And they were getting taxed and taxed and taxed in rural areas too. Nothing changes. Because this system is a parasitical system that we live in. And I try to go through this in the books and so on, and I show you some of the techniques that have been used down through the ages to control the people by those in the know. And that's what I mean by in the know. Codes are always used by those in the know and by those who rule you. If you look at all the different departments in government, even declassified information from different departments, and even fairly innocuous departments as well. Everything is so coded at the top too, so that those who read it in the system, the civil service, understand exactly what it's about, where it's from, and so on. Everything's coded. The language is coded. The language of brainwashing is coded as well. You're brainwashed every day by what they call news today. You really are. And folk never figure it out. So as I say, buy the books and disc at cuttingthroughminutes.com and donate as well. You can pay any way you want. You can send me a check. You can send cash in. Or international postal money orders, if you don't want to do it that way, from other countries. And from the States to Canada, 2 international postal money orders are okay. And just from your post office, but it's got to be international. And within Canada, of course, they use just Canadian post office ones for the nation itself, internal. But as I say, you've got to understand the system. And the system is very complex, only because you haven't really thought too deeply about it before. The media isn't going to come out and tell you how it really works. That's not what the media is there for. I can remember reading, I think it was the Anglo-American Establishment, and different books by Quigley, different works that he did, Carroll Quigley, and he was a historian for a while for the Council on Foreign Relations, which is the branch of the American branch at that time of the Royal Institute for International Affairs in Britain, which has branches across the whole planet. And they also run the British Council as well. Their members run that too. They create future leaders. They actually they grab children, train them to be future leaders across the planet in all countries, and give them educations. And they're the ones you're seeing today take over different countries, by the way. For those who think you live in democracies, good luck. But you've got to understand that Quigley talked about this quite a bit, in fact, and one of his books was just like book burning, only he smashed the place. Instead, he said too much, because they weren't ready to allow the public to know about how the system really works. The real establishment is vastly different from the way you're trained to believe it is. It's a private club. It really is a private club. And they have other sub-clubs attached to them for specialized areas. And sometimes they'll transfer people between clubs, or the circles, they call them, from one to the other club, depending on how they need them and where they need them and so on. And you can't apply to join them. You're asked if they choose you. And if they choose you, you've been well vetted beforehand. And these are private clubs. And of course, as I say, they don't run for election as a club member, but although the clubs themselves put their members out there to be elected, and Quigley goes through that process. But he does go through the system to some extent, and not completely in depth, but in depth enough so you can start to get the picture of how it really works. And their vision is vastly different of a future than the people in the nations, the ordinary people ever suspect. You're given this nonsense of politics. And he mentions that all the top members of the political parties are members of this particular organization. They are allowed to differ in certain ways to achieve their ends, but they all have the same ends. And of course they're allowed to fill their pockets to a good extent too, naturally, with their plunder, because they're proven they're superior once they get near the top. But again, they must obey the masters above them, the ones that are unelected, who really have the power. It's really interesting to understand how it really does work. And nothing is ever as it seems, of course. Nothing really is ever as it seems for the public. But we're trained to believe that we elect people and we have something called democracy. Although Plato and others went into democracy, and they said that it always ends up in a form of communism. And then it literally is overthrown by either a coup, riots, and so on, because it cannot last. It's always so corrupt. So nothing changes, you see. Nothing ever changes. The techniques of understanding the human mind are important. The distractions are awfully important. And we're given today more entertainment than any generation has ever seen in history, as far as we know. We're given more pharmaceutical drugs that are psychoactive than any people before us, which dulls the mind. And we're also being given now the next step, which is, of course, which were the banned drugs with, the cannabinoid, different products. They're coming out now, for instance, in Canada, big time. And people will still think it's just happening because some people at the bottom fought battles. No, it wasn't. Nothing to do with that at all. Back in the 80s, the Canadian government was growing pot underground. Underground, yeah. And they did a documentary in the 90s. It just suddenly came out of the blue, and for those who can remember it, might remember it, and how they were bowled over when suddenly they showed you these long, there's big wide tunnels underground with hydroponics going, and the Canadian government had been growing pot. And they said at that time, it's for the future where we might go and use it for medicine. And you can believe that if you want. And you'll find that everybody who's part of the establishment, the higher establishment of Canada, will have shares in these big companies, including the police chiefs, by the way. These big companies that are running it today. So anyway, man is very ancient. The art of controlling people's minds is ancient too. You'll find little clues in it, like the clues you get from Arthur C. Clarke, who was one of the boys, you might say. And he wrote 2001. He wrote Childhood's End, which is about really evolution through aliens coming down and so on, and giving people everything they wanted. They didn't have to work, but they're really after the children to breed a particular generation of children that they could then evolve and take with them, and the old humans would have to perish and die because they were now obsolete. Because of course it's to do with eugenics, you see. And Arthur C. Clarke, with the organizations he belonged to, understood this. If you understand even Masonry, Freemasonry, you'll find the same kind of thing too. They have no problem at all in the City of London, in their organizations, they're rather openly actually, showing you in symbology and an occasional little utterance that they are superior to other people. And there are different kinds of classes of people. Let's say the word classes. People don't want to mention that anymore, but it's still alive and well. And you'll find that everything's to do with evolution and change. That's why the members in Masonry are almost talking about change, and that there are no moral absolutes. Very important to understand that. And morality and moral absolutes are only for the particular period, and the next generation might go the opposite way with the moral absolutes. Part of the reason, and they won't tell you that, of course, they never do, it doesn't happen by itself. The pendulum doesn't just swing one way and then swing the other. Everything is controlled and pushed in different directions by intelligence and by organization. That's how it happens. But Arthur C. Clarke, as I say, he wrote 2001, then 2010, and then 3001. Very important too, because 3001, most of the bulk of the population, the lesser classes, I think, are just somehow just vanish, you see, bred out or die off or something. And the brainy types, the ones who are all the top scientists and technicians, are all interbred, and they live almost like gods with their high technologies and so on. So it's not that difficult to get to the picture if you understand what you're actually saying and what they're showing in symbology and so on. It's eugenics, of course. Winners and losers, etc., etc. And so Pike said it too, as I say, Albert Pike. They make no apology for nature. No apology at all. And of course, they make a big deal about the symbology through lions, for instance. It's a good one is lions. Very important. King of the Jungle, which of course is also what was behind King of the Jungle. Rudyard Kipling's Jungle Book, of course. If you go into some of the known experiments that lasted many years, such as MK-Ultra, which is one part of this huge, big experimental area. It wasn't just depatterning the brain to reorganize someone's brain and then rebuild them in your image, basically, the scientist's image or the controller's image. It really was about psychic driving and many other things too, and the use of drugs as well, which was being forced on society at the time. in a way where they always think it's for themselves, such as the youth always think it's for themselves. This is fun, this is good, we're naughty, we're bad. And suddenly LSD's tossed all over the place, free initially, big time. And the CIA was behind it, big time too. And they'd had the drugs since the 1930s. They knew what it did. So sex, drugs, rock and roll was launched as part of the plan too, to destabilize the old system, break the pattern of the old system. We had a tradition and families, and you had families that are a nuisance when they stand together. When bills are passed they don't like, it's bad for them and so on, they would tend to band together. So they're a problem for those that govern when change is planned, big change, especially destruction of the family unit, and that's exactly what they did. H.G. Wells talked about it, many others once talked about it, that they'd have to do that so that there's no one standing alongside you to help you when the government is coming for you and coming down to speak to you. You'll be just you and the government, and little old you doesn't have much of a chance. That's happened, isn't it? Isolation. So the MK Ultra thing was for the general population, those who've studied it haven't quite figured it out yet. The psychic driving is repetition, 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 and the same things over and over too. Slogans, you listen to the songs that went out there, repetition, repetition, repetition. Theo Adorno talked about it because he was part of the Frankfurt School for the same function, to destroy the family unit and so on of the Western culture. And listen to the Beatles songs, and he owned the Beatles songs, remember? And it was they were all sold once he died, and up for grabs, and Paul McCartney competed with Michael Jackson for the bids over the rights to the title or the songs, and Jackson won at the time. Nothing, as I say, is ever how it seems to be to the people. Big money, big agendas, big plans are always in operation, and the public have never to be told that they are. The public are taught that everything's spontaneous, that somehow everything's laid on for their entertainment. And it's always easier to go for the youth, because the youth have been taught that they're separate, they're different from the old fogies. And they're taught it's their generation, like the song goes talking about my generation. And so suddenly they created this new cult, that the teenager. It didn't exist before, even the term didn't exist before, by the way. It was meant to separate the youngsters from their parents and old folk in general, which is awfully good. Then any kind of old morality or even logic of history, we have learned in history, wouldn't get passed on to them. Don't talk to them. Don't talk to anybody over 30. Then it came down even younger. That was the slogan. And so the youngsters of that generation really thought somehow they were building the world. They weren't even in their 20s yet, some of them, but they thought they were building the world. And they thought the music was all theirs. Didn't dawn them that the music machine, this massive business, this massive culture industry, is an essential part of control, and it was already controlled. And it came out, if they pushed anything from the culture industry, it was in their own interests, and it's for societal change, not for the youngsters' change. Never has been. And here we are today. That was awfully successful, from the 60s to the present. And the agenda of literally that you found in 1984, where they would have women's groups too, with the red sash on and so on, the perpetual sort of kind of virgins and so on. This army of women is almost be complete too. They're doing the same thing. It's still going on, hasn't stopped. That was the agenda: separate men from women. And every group always must think, all the followers must think they're in control of what they're doing. Because it's a war that's going on, and they aren't planning it, but the leaders of them are well picked by the ones who really run the world. They know what the big agenda is in reality. The followers always think they do, but they're useful idiots. And when you subdivide all categories of humanity, they can't come together as one, you see. When it really will count, they won't be able to do it. And then you really do indoctrinate them that nothing is normal. That's where it's all supposed to go. Nothing's normal. There's no such thing as normal, like Pike said. There's no such thing as cultural, real permanent culture, no permanent truth. We actually said there's no permanent truth. And that's now taught today all through universities by fake philosophers. Isn't it? A situation ethics. Now, if nothing's normal, then you can, if you're the masters of the universe, basically, you can reshape the world and everything in it the way you want it to be done. And the material will then be convinced before you even start. You must train them to be convinced that nothing's normal, and then they'll allow themselves to be shaped into whatever the masters want. Think about it. You are as sovereign as anything on the planet, if you want to be. And no one has a right to do anything to you, or alter you, or use you like some kind of putty, or plasticine, or clay, for their own ends. And that's what's happening right now. Very old plan by those who already own most of the planet. Now, Quigley said that this big world organization for global government, basically, and it was government, and is government, was often mistaken for communism. And by that he was referring to even the McCarthy era, the Reds under the bed stuff and so on. And a lot of them were communists too. And he said that in our group, our organization, we have everyone, dictators, communists, fascists, capitalists, all of them. They don't mind who they work with. And they bring them all in. And sure enough, the book I read last week, some bits of it, that whole book was their international meeting that year from 1937, published in 1938, with all the top politicians from all countries and civil servants and capitalists and financiers and so on all attending it. And even then they wanted to keep themselves pretty well hidden from the public, with a name even. But they did publish on the groups that attended it, the Royal Institute for International Affairs for Britain, Australia, New Zealand, and various other countries. They had members from India and now, of course, with the British Council. That's part of their organization. They also have probably close to 100 countries or more involved with them. And, of course, they have their own European Union department now as well for the politicians that run the whole of Europe. They run that as well, this private organization, the European Council on Foreign Relations. But you're given the ones to vote for, like, you was always voting for dummies. It's a lot cheaper. Dress them up, put them in front of the TV cameras. Do you want this one, that one, or that one? And play a little tape off them saying, I'm for this and I'm for that. And you don't have to pay them wages or anything. They're dummies, right? And vote them in because they don't run the countries. They don't. Do you think those people and families who've ruled the world for centuries are going to just hand it over to someone's radical ideas who thinks they're a prime minister or a president or something? Do you really think that would happen? Are you kidding? Margaret Thatcher belonged to it. And when she left Parliament, she mentioned it. She says, I belong to a group of people who are technocrats. She's talking about the Council on Foreign Relations and Royal Institute for International Affairs and so on. And she's also talking, of course, about their other organization, the Trilateral Organization. They pick members for that too. And she says, we all meet, all ex-prime ministers, presidents, ex-bureaucrats, civil servants, and bankers. We meet and we get things done. We don't have to go to the public for approval. We can get things done without the input or condemnation of the public, because it's never published. How many exposés do you need? How many admissions do you need from those involved to start to get the picture? Or do you fall right back into the emotional, he said, she said stuff in politics the next day? Because it's all drama, isn't it? We've never seen so much drama today. It's like a soap opera. If you notice, you're not getting much of what governments are really up to, the policies and so on. Because they're training you into a new system altogether where you're not really involved at all. Before you weren't involved, but at least you had an idea what was going on to an extent in some areas. Not in, maybe 40, 50% of the stuff you'd never know. But in some areas they had to tell you something. Today they don't. You're given soap operas instead. In all countries. All countries. And government has really withdrawn from the areas of government which used to hand out little bits of information to the public, because that was the policies that people were used to getting policies at least discussed in some areas, but not anymore. They don't tell you anything. They just pass bills and so on. They pass bills, and that's the first you hear them often. You're under a new form, you see, is changed. This is the century of change, transition. That's what they call it. And it's not your place to know. They're becoming very arrogant again. The bureaucrats are rather obvious. It's not your place to know anything. Winners and losers. You're one of the losers, so you'd be one of them. And then they might tell you something. But if you're not one of them, well, you're a loser. You're the public, the people down there, the public. But you're given all these dramas. And if you notice, with all the protests that are going on right now in different countries, and the US is a big one, of course, it started with the Me Too's, and it's gone on from there, but think about it. What you're seeing is the perfect classic demonstration of the Saul Alinsky program and the rules for radicals, and how you don't debate anything calmly. You just do your chanting. When someone's trying to speak, you keep chanting over and over and over. You see? Drown them out. It's all from rules for radicals. The techniques are being used right now to stop folk getting in or out of power, or whatever it happens to be. It's rather interesting to watch it, such a clear-cut demonstration of it all. You think about it too. If government really is the way it's supposed to be, and how it's organized and so on, don't you think if there was the slightest chance that any group is trying to overthrow the system, it wouldn't be dealt with immediately? Don't you think so? Isn't that what's supposed to happen? The first law for them, first rule, is to protect and maintain itself. That's the government. That's what they do. Because the government is really a combination of those who really own the country and really rule it. And yet you're watching this thing go on and on and on and on and on. So obviously no one's really hurting here. Or it would be stopped. So what we're getting, is this soap or is it drama? What is it? The biggest news we got, really, was the speech at United Nations by Trump. Little bits and pieces, you know. And of course he's going to stand by for more wars in the Middle East. That's obvious. Mr. Netanyahu was there too with his drawings and his supposed evidence, etc., which we'll never get to see, you know. It's like Groundhog Day, isn't it? Over and over and over. But don't be surprised, because the agenda was published in the 90s, the list of countries that must be taken out, for the ones who really own the country, right? And it was the General Clerk mentioned it too on Democracy Today, was it? Or now, one of the two. But he mentioned the list. And how it was presented to him at the time. And it was a shock to him. He didn't know either. And the Project for a New American Century group, the neocons, had it published twice in the 90s. And it still goes on, because agendas are set in stone, basically. They don't change and give up. They might alter here and there a little bit, but they get what they want. They always get what they want, eventually. We see Syria just announcing that it's stable enough now to try to bring Syrian refugees back to the country to help rebuild it and so on. And now they're wanting to take Syria and Iran. Again, Iran was on the list too. And a few other countries around that area, as you know. And since the 90s, and then 2001, added to it with the bombing of Iraq and so on, and then the two out Libya as well after that too. The mass of migration in Europe has changed it forever, and it's still happening. Europe's changed forever. It's not Europe anymore, it's a different entity really, isn't it, in transition. In countries that don't manufacture things so much anymore, it's mainly the service industry that already is overloaded with welfare because people had enough. There's not enough work for people, healthcare and all the rest of it, and yet the populations are being told that they're going to pay more and more and more to bring in more and more refugees from all these wars, and now here's another bunch of wars for the rest of the list to continue. Can you get it through your heads that people behind all these wars don't represent the people they pretend to represent as leaders? Because they have a vastly different agenda than the public they pretend to serve. I don't care what side it is either. Quigley said it. They're all members of the same organization at the top. They simply take the left-hand path or the right-hand path, but they always end up in the same road down the road, as far as the agenda goes. As I say, Syria, Foreign Minister tells the UN countries ready for your refugee return. And then they got the US pulls diplomats from Iraqi city, citing threats from Iran. They'll never be happy. You know, they had, for years ago, they had the transition teams being trained for all the countries they've overthrown. Trained in London, generally. So they'll go into these countries, they've got the ones that will take them over, and they've got their personas made up for them, and et cetera, et cetera. This is democracy. Training people to go into countries, people who are generally from those countries, who are going to be made the future leaders, and you just get rid of the old ones, eh? And that's something. Quite something. So anyway, they're pulling the diplomats from Iraq, an Iraqi city, Basra. And they're increasing US economic sanctions and all this kind of stuff too. And it's also supposedly to put a bulwark against Iran, because they definitely want to take out Iran, and Israel is really furious. You can see Netanyahu's he's been getting fed up for years now with America dragging its heels on getting it all done. And as I say, you ought to see the speeches of United Nations. It's just like Groundhog Day. People go right back to where they've been when something collides with their training or indoctrination. And they're right back to square one the following day. It's like it's out their mind, it's just tossed out. As I say, even when you get admissions from those who are doing it, they tend to forget that. It's not, and they have studies and studies and studies upon how people think and what leads them to do that. They know this, what makes them to do it. What leads them to do it. Because it's what they can handle, what they can't handle. We have this nice, safe kind of myth-making machine inside of us, actually. It keeps us kind of secure. We'd crack up, wouldn't we? We'd really crack up. Or you'd run off for your pills from the pharmacy, or else you'd get what Canada's given them, like dope to the world, dope ink, basically, for the planet. So I mentioned too, how government works with your money. You know darn well that all big banks are kind of private, and yet you've got a strange public-private deal with some of the big banks, like Royal Bank of Scotland. There really isn't Scottish at all, I guess, was it? But the Royal Bank of Scotland's chairman has admitted it's unlikely the government will get back all the £45 billion pumped into the bank. Now, the government pumped taxpayers' money into it, naturally, as taxpayers. So the government won't, the people won't get it back. Forget the government. £45.5 billion to try to bail it out to an extent. And don't forget that I think the British government owned about 80% of the shares. The London government, or the London, let's say the city of London, because that's what runs the world, isn't it? They owned about 80% of that bank. Anyway, so there you go. I guess it's gone to money heaven, just like the last crash we had. Where did it go during that little inquiry they had? Oh, it's money heaven, we're told, with quite the dose of arrogance, weren't we? Also, marijuana for Canada, right? Growing marijuana 101, how your pot is being produced ahead of legislation. They're ready to pass it. They're the big deal. They've been making it for a long time, as I say, but now it's time to have it all legit, etc. And you're supposed to be all happy about it. You see people smoking, blowing this smoke out. And it's okay to smoke this stuff now. Although the same governments have been bashing everybody else for smoking cigarettes for years and years. But it's okay to smoke this. There you go. Not bad, eh? And you want common sense, eh? You want common sense and logic, yeah? Everybody's been had here, eh? Everybody. And this is about canopy growth in Smith Falls, Ontario. It's a 500,000 square foot facility. There used to be a Hershey's chocolate factory. Now it houses hundreds of millions of dollars worth of cannabis products. There you go. So there you go. And then it says the PC government are going to table bill on pot legislation. There you go. The bill will appoint the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario. So it's like the mafia, isn't the alcohol? It sounds like it. The Alcohol and Gaming. That's your gambling commission. So they'll be dealing your drugs now too, running all that. Eh? As a regulator for the marketplace, the province adding it will not put a cap on pot shops when it begins its licensing process. And it's all done with a happy, smiley face type of kind of article. Isn't it? Time for Soma, eh? Time for Soma. And the same governments are trying to pull back medications for folk in severe pain who don't want to be stoned all day. That's quite amazing, isn't it? But it isn't amazing at all. It's only amazing if you really believe that government is what you've been trained to think it is, actually. You start thinking for yourselves, for those who want to. Remember, not everybody wants to. Not everybody can handle truth. Because truth is rather scary. When you've had a really intense indoctrination into one reality, the fake reality. But it's rather scary to get the truth, to realize it, what it really is. I've got some articles on the myth makers, people who create the realities of modern time for us all to believe in, and they actually boast about it. They call themselves the myth makers. You know, the sciences of behaviorism and psychology and so on. The psychodynamics of growing up, the stages that you go through and how to use those stages for different ends and purposes. And the last people who will figure that out are the ones who are used. Happens all the time. All the time. Charles Galton Darwin, who wrote The Next Million Years, said that slavery has existed in some form or another in all ages. All ages. And he didn't see any reason why it would be any different today and tomorrow. Don't forget, everything today is disguised, isn't it? Very, very well disguised indeed. You're given your same indoctrination across the planet as at an early age, like Russell said would have to be done. And your subsequent propaganda indoctrination is so scientifically designed. You got to read some of this, the teachers, they call it toolkits for indoctrination. They don't call it indoctrination, but that's what it is. Of course it's indoctrination. Indoctrination is not a bad word as such. It means what it is. You get instilled with a doctrine, you see. But it's not your own doctrine, it's to serve someone else. It's really amazing how little people really know about life. And it's kind of like the lodge door, as you say. Think about it. The lodge door in the mystique of Freemasonry. This kind of army that's scattered across the planet, everywhere, where those in the know can pick candidates to go up higher, to help manage the system over the people, right down to the local area. And even the ones at the bottom don't know they're being used for something else, generally, because they get little perks and, you know. But it also ties in, again, with what Pike said. And what did he say? He said, what I mentioned before, we make no excuse for nature. If people if they get curious and knock on the door, remember, but they've used the Bible and so on, not because they believe in that, but they use it. Knocking the door will open, eh? Seeking you will find. It's the same thing, you see. And the ones who are curious, mind you, most of them are told to go there anyway, but the ones who are curious show that very thing, that curiosity, whereas most of the people don't. That's what they mean by it. So they can only be thinking, well, yeah, I was curious, I had a superior nature. But there are many ways to find out about it without knocking on the door. Of course. The one thing they make sure that everybody does know in every area is that it can help you get ahead in life. At any station that you're in. It might help you get the job, or promotion, even at the bottom levels. It can bring business to your small store. They will help each other out, they got to. So it's a safeguard, isn't it? So they make sure people know this, to attract people in. But then, when you've really got the levels and the degrees and so on, you'd really find at the very high degrees that the world's run by a vastly different system. That's the whole point of it. Than that which everybody else is taught, all the so-called profane are taught. Sad, isn't it? The deceit in society and the world. Very sad. And to think that anybody who's on a fancy outfit is better than anybody else is the biggest deception of all. Because you'll find the same people, and the same selection of peoples in these organizations as you find everywhere else. The con men, the rip-off merchants, etc., etc. And that's the sad part too, isn't it? That people love to strut around thinking they're better or different and so on. Rather sad. Really very, very sad indeed. But, as I say, buy the books and the discs at cuttingthroughmirrors.com. Get yourself to start thinking and understanding it. For yourself if you want to. That's all it is. Everything out there is a con today. Even the old movements that used to be out there to really teach the people their basic rights and so on have all gone, been knocked down. Because even amongst them there was deception crept in, eh? Used for other purposes by other people. And that's the world we live in. That's what it's all about. Conology. conning the public, and using them all, and preparing the next generation to be used for the next level of bricks on the wall. For myself, Alan Waterman here at Canada, it's good night, and may your God or your gods go with you.